The wind off Crestmont's river cut like a blade. It slipped between the pillars of the federal courthouse, rattled the metal barricades, and made the microphones on the newsstands squeal with sharp, ugly feedback. Cameras blinked red. 100 lenses waited for a face to break. An eyebrow twitch, a jaw clench, anything that could be turned into a headline before noon. On the courthouse steps, a man stood as if the building had been erected for him. Not tall in a way that made people step aside, but tall in a way that made them feel they should. His suit was charcoal, his tie precise. He kept his hands calmly folded, like prayer. Except it wasn't prayer. It was confidence. It was performance. Graham Voss watched the crowd like a monarch surveying a courtyard. Behind him, the glass doors reflected his silhouette twice. One version sharp, one version blurred, like even the courthouse couldn't decide which one was real. A reporter shouted, "Mr. Voss, is it true she lied about her identity?" Another voice, "Are you seeking damages?" A third, "Was she ever your real wife?" Graham didn't answer. He didn't need to. He had been answering for weeks with every leak, every carefully timed photograph of him smiling beside Serena Blaine, every anonymous source telling the world his wife had been unstable, opportunistic, a nobody from nowhere. The story had already been packaged. All that was left was the bow. Graham's attorney leaned in close and murmured something. Graham nodded once, the smallest movement, like tapping a chess piece to confirm the checkmate. Across the street, Serena Blaine stood in a cream coat that looked expensive and effortless. Her hair fell in waves that suggested she had never rushed for anything in her life. She didn't come close enough for the cameras to catch her clearly. She knew how to be seen without being touched by the frame. She lifted her phone, angled it just right, and whispered, "Smile. This is the day you get your life back." Graham's mouth curved, and then the sound arrived. At first it was faint, a vibration you felt more than heard, a tremor in the air that made the flags on the courthouse roof snap and strain. The crowd reacted before they understood why, heads tilted up, hands shielding eyes, people stepping backward in unison, like the sky had suddenly become an ocean and something enormous was surfacing. The helicopter came over the skyline low and fast, blades thundering. It wasn't a news chopper. It wasn't a medical evac. It moved with the clean precision of something used to authority, something that didn't ask permission to enter airspace because permission had already been granted. Dust whipped off the street. Loose papers danced. The courthouse steps became a stage with a new spotlight. Graham's smile faltered, only for a fraction of a second. Serena's phone lowered. The helicopter banked and descended toward the landing pad behind the courthouse, and the crowd surged, hungry and confused, trying to get a better angle, trying to understand why a federal building was suddenly receiving a private aircraft like this was a royal arrival. Then the doors swung open. A line of security moved first, men and women with earpieces, eyes scanning, hands positioned not aggressively but ready. Not private bodyguards in flashy suits. This was a different kind of readiness. Quiet, controlled. The kind that made everyone else feel suddenly loud. And in the space they created, she appeared. Black coat, hair pulled back. No jewels, no dramatic lipstick, no theatrical sadness. Just a woman stepping onto the concrete like she owned the ground beneath it. The blades above churned the air so hard her coat tugged at her like a living thing. She didn't fight it. She walked through it. A reporter gasped, "Is that?" Someone else whispered, "No way." Graham's attorney went pale. Graham stared as if the world had tilted and he was trying not to show it. She climbed the courthouse steps without looking at the cameras, without looking at Serena, without looking at Graham. Not yet. Halfway up she paused, not because she was tired, not because she was nervous, because she wanted the moment to land. Her gaze lifted, finally, and found Graham. It wasn't anger. It wasn't pleading. It was recognition, like seeing a familiar object left out in the rain. Something that used to shine, now corroded, still insisting it was valuable. Graham swallowed. The air was so loud with helicopter thunder that nobody could have heard a whisper. Yet when she spoke, it felt like the entire courthouse heard it anyway. "Good morning," she said. 2 words, polite, cold, final. Graham forced a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "Evelyn," he called, using the name he thought belonged to her like it was a collar he could snap back into place. "You really want to do this?" She didn't answer. Behind her, a man stepped forward, mid-40s, broad-shouldered, face like carved stone. His suit was black, his expression neutral. But his eyes looked like they had memorized the anatomy of power. He carried a leather folder under one arm. He didn't glance at the cameras. He didn't glance at Graham. He looked only at the courthouse doors, as if the building was a patient and he was the surgeon. A reporter whispered the nickname like a rumor made flesh. "Marcus Vale," someone said. "The butcher." Graham's attorney muttered, "That's impossible." Graham's jaw tightened. "Who the hell is that?" Evelyn's voice was calm. "The person you should have met before you decided to make this ugly." Graham scoffed, loud enough for the microphones. "Ugly? You lied to me. You lied to the world." Evelyn finally turned her face toward the press. For the first time, the cameras got her full on. And what they captured wasn't the trembling poor wife the tabloids had painted. It was composure, so steady it made the crowd uneasy. She said, "This story doesn't begin with what I supposedly did." Her eyes went back to Graham. "It begins with what you believed you were entitled to do to me." She took one more step, then another, until she stood just a few feet away. The helicopter noise faded as it lifted again and pulled away, leaving behind a sudden, ringing silence that made every breath audible. Evelyn's fingers brushed the courthouse railing, a small, grounding touch. Then she leaned in, close enough that Graham could smell her perfume, clean and faint, like rain on stone, and she whispered something only he could hear. Whatever it was, color drained from his face. He opened his mouth. No sound came out. Evelyn straightened and walked through the glass doors. Marcus Vale followed. And as the doors swung shut behind them, cutting off the cameras, the crowd erupted into frantic questions, because they could sense it. Whatever Graham thought he'd arranged today, he wasn't holding the knife. He was on the table. To understand how a man like Graham Voss ended up speechless on federal courthouse steps, you have to go back to a smell. Burnt coffee, and a small diner off a Kansas highway where a woman named Evelyn Ashford once poured refills with a smile she practiced in the mirror because her real face was too dangerous to show. But the story doesn't start there either. It starts with what she was willing to pretend. For 5 full years. The diner in Wichita was the kind of place that never really closed, only dimmed. Even at 2 in the morning, the fluorescent lights hummed as if they were trying to stay awake. The windows wore a permanent film of grease and dust from the highway. The booths were patched with duct tape. The air always held a bitter undernote, coffee left too long on the burner. Evelyn Ashford moved between tables with the kind of quiet efficiency that made people forget she existed. That was the point. Her hair was pinned back. Her uniform was simple. Her smile was soft in a way that invited underestimation. Men at the counter talked about their jobs like they were the only hard jobs in the world. Truckers complained about schedules. College kids laughed too loud. A woman in a corner booth cried silently into her napkin and pretended she wasn't. Evelyn refilled mugs. She wiped a spill. She nodded at a joke she didn't find funny. And every few minutes her eyes flicked. Not to the customers, but to the door. Because she wasn't waiting for company. She was waiting for confirmation. On the inside of her left wrist, hidden by the cuff of her uniform, a thin band of skin was slightly paler than the rest, like something used to be there and had been removed. She touched it sometimes without thinking, a habit as old as discipline. At 2:17 a.m., the bell above the door rang. A man stepped in carrying rain on his shoulders. He was well dressed for Wichita. Not ostentatious, No flashy watch, no loud designer label, but the kind of clean tailoring that told you he didn't buy his suits off the rack. His hair was damp from the storm, but it still sat neatly, like he had an agreement with gravity. He scanned the diner once, eyes quick and assessing, then chose a booth near the window as if he liked being able to see the parking lot. Evelyn picked up a menu and approached. "Evening," she said. He looked up. His eyes were sharp, curious, and, most dangerously, used to being obeyed. "Coffee," he said. Evelyn didn't ask how he wanted it. People like him didn't take it fancy in places like this. They took it black and acted like it proved they were tough. She poured. The coffee was too dark, too hot, and smelled like it had been punished. He didn't flinch. "Long night?" she offered, not because she cared, but because politeness was her camouflage. He smiled. "Long life." Long. That should have sounded arrogant. From him, it sounded like a confession. He watched her set down the cup. Then, as if he couldn't help himself, he asked, "You always work this late?" Evelyn shrugged. "Someone has to." He tilted his head. "What's your name?" For a fraction of a second, Evelyn's smile tightened. The question was harmless. It was also a doorway. Names were how people entered. She kept her tone light. "Evelyn." He nodded as if committing it to memory. "Graham." She returned to the counter, expecting that to be the end of it. Rich men passed through diners all the time, some on road trips, some on business, some on the run from their own thoughts. But Graham didn't leave after he finished his coffee. He sat for another hour, not eating, not scrolling on his phone, just watching the rain slide down the window like time melting. At 3:06 a.m., Evelyn noticed something unusual. His hands were shaking. Not like fear, like exhaustion that had been forced to hold itself upright for too long. Evelyn moved toward him. "You okay?" He laughed quietly. "Have you ever built something so big you couldn't sleep because you were afraid someone would steal it?" Evelyn's heart gave a small, careful beat. She chose her words like stepping on ice. "I wouldn't know." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I'm Graham Voss." Evelyn kept her face blank. "Nice to meet you." His eyes narrowed. "You don't know who I am." "I don't have cable," she said, and let it sound like a joke. That made him smile, genuine this time. Something softened in him, something dangerous. Men like Graham didn't like being unknown. They liked being recognized. They liked the instant permission fame gave them. Evelyn's ignorance, real or performed, felt like relief. He asked, "What do you want to do with your life, Evelyn?" It was such a rich question. Such a privileged question. Only people with options asked it like it was philosophical. Evelyn wiped the table next to him that didn't need wiping. "Get through it." He watched her hands. "You're too smart to be here." Evelyn's smile stayed in place, but her thoughts tightened. Don't react. Don't take bait. Don't let him see the real you. But the truth was, she was too smart to be here. And Graham could sense it the way predators sensed a weak fence. He stood, leaving cash on the table. Too much for a coffee. As he walked toward the door, he paused and looked back. "You're hiding," he said, quietly enough that only she heard. Evelyn's stomach cooled. Before she could respond, he added, "So am I." Then the bell rang again, and he was gone. Evelyn stood still, listening to the rain. In the kitchen, the cook yelled for more plates. At the counter, someone complained about the Wi-Fi. Life continued like a river, pretending it hadn't noticed a stone drop into it. Evelyn returned to work. But in her pocket, her phone buzzed. 1 vibration. 2. A code she recognized without thinking. She slid it out under the counter and checked the message. Stay close. Target engaged. Evelyn stared at the words until they blurred. Outside, the highway lights turned the wet asphalt into a ribbon of silver. Graham Voss was not supposed to be her problem. Graham Voss was not supposed to be anyone's husband. And yet, 3 weeks later, he was sitting at that same booth again, telling her about Crestmont Hills, about glass houses on cliffs, about investors who smiled while sharpening knives, about competitors who wanted him dead in the metaphorical sense and maybe, someday, in the literal sense. Evelyn listened. She asked small questions. She laughed at the right moments. She let him feel interesting. She let him feel safe. And the more he came back, the more he treated her like the antidote to his world. "You make everything quiet," he told her one night, when the diner was empty except for a teenager mopping the floor. "When I'm with you, I can breathe." Evelyn didn't tell him the quiet was an instrument. She didn't tell him she'd been trained to create it. Instead, she said, "Maybe you just need to sleep." He smiled. Then he reached across the table, took her hand and asked, almost shyly, "Come with me." Evelyn felt the weight of that sentence. It wasn't romance, not yet. It was recruitment disguised as rescue. Graham's world was powerful, bright, dangerous. A place where her presence would be noticed, where eyes would follow, where questions would multiply. Exactly what she had been told to avoid. Her phone buzzed again. Evelyn glanced down. Do it. Her pulse didn't spike. It settled. That was the strangest part. As if her body had already accepted that this was how her life would turn. On a booth seat sticky with old syrup, in a diner that smelled like burnt coffee and rain. She looked back at Graham and let softness enter her face. "I don't have much," she said. "I have enough for both of us," he replied, and it sounded like a vow. Evelyn nodded slowly. "Okay," she said, and just like that, the cover story locked into place. Within 6 months, there was a wedding, small, private, tasteful in a way that suggested Graham wanted the world to think it was modest, even though everything about it cost more than a Kansas diner made in a year. Evelyn wore a simple dress. Graham looked at her like he'd discovered something rare. At the reception, someone asked Evelyn where her family was. Evelyn smiled. "We're not close." That part was true, in the way lies were sometimes true. The family she belonged to wasn't absent. They were simply not allowed to be seen. When Evelyn moved into Glass Ridge Estate, she learned quickly how Graham's world functioned. The house was all sharp angles and reflective surfaces, as if it had been designed to remind you constantly that you were being watched. A hallway lined with modern art that looked like expensive confusion. A kitchen so pristine it seemed unused, because Graham rarely ate at home. He consumed protein shakes and caffeine and the kind of stress that became his main diet. At first, Evelyn played the part perfectly. She decorated. She hosted charity dinners. She laughed at the wives' jokes. She smiled at the husband's compliments like she didn't hear the hunger behind them. And at night, when Graham came home late, smelling like cologne and ambition, she listened as he unloaded his fears. "Somebody is trying to get into my payment infrastructure," he said once, voice thick with anger. "They're not amateurs." Evelyn kept her tone gentle. "Could it be a competitor?" Graham shook his head. "No, this is organized, patient." Evelyn touched his hand. "You'll handle it." He looked at her like she was magic. And in a way she was. She just wasn't magic for him. Because while Evelyn Ashford was learning how to fold napkins into elegant shapes for Crestmont's elite, Evelyn Kane was quietly watching Graham's company from the inside. Voss Nova Systems was a crown jewel, an AI-driven platform that could route payments at scale, protect transactions, and integrate with everything from banks to phone apps. Its infrastructure mattered. Its encryption mattered more. Deep inside its code was a project Graham bragged about to investors with words like revolutionary and unbreakable. He called it Aegis. Evelyn knew the truth. Aegis Cipher wasn't his invention. It was Kane Consortium's property, seeded into Voss Nova years ago as part of a strategic partnership Graham never fully understood. A deliberate placement, a trap, because somewhere out there, a network of criminals Financial predators with money-laundering pipelines and black market tech had become obsessed with getting their hands on Aegis. If they stole it, they could unlock systems people assumed were safe. So Kane Consortium did what Kane Consortium always did. They didn't wait for the attack. They designed the battlefield. And Evelyn, heir to Kane Consortium, trained since adolescence in operational cover, was placed in Graham's orbit to monitor, protect, and, if necessary, burn everything down before the wrong hands touched the cipher. When Evelyn accepted Graham's hand in Wichita, she wasn't falling. She was stepping onto a mission. At first it was easy. Graham was genuinely charmed by her. He liked that she didn't challenge him. He liked that she didn't compete. He liked that she looked at him like he was brilliant because she did it so convincingly. And maybe, in quiet moments, she even meant it. Because Graham could be kind in the beginning. He brought her coffee in bed and kissed her forehead. He told her he loved the way she made the world slow down. He asked her opinion on mundane things like paint colors and garden layout, as if her preferences mattered. For a while, Evelyn allowed herself a small, dangerous thought. Maybe I can do this and still be human. Then Crestmont began to whisper. The wives at charity dinners asked where she went to school. They asked what her parents did. They asked why she never posted photos of her family. Evelyn smiled and answered with gentle vagueness, the way she had been trained. Graham, for all his intelligence, didn't see the risk. He saw only the narrative he liked best, that he had plucked a quiet girl from nowhere and brought her into light. It made him feel generous. It made him feel powerful. It made him feel like a savior. And saviors always eventually demand worship. The shift happened slowly, like a crack spreading under paint. Graham began to correct Evelyn in public. You mean amuse-bouche, not appetizer, he'd say, laughing, when she knew exactly what she meant. He'd interrupt her stories at dinners to tell people the funnier version. He'd complain about her small-town habits with a smile that invited others to laugh. Evelyn laughed too, because she understood something early. If you're undercover, you don't fight the tide. You learn to swim in it. Then Serena Blaine entered the orbit. Serena first appeared at one of Graham's product launches, an influencer with a curated presence, hired to boost visibility. She wore confidence like jewelry. She knew how to stand beside powerful men without looking submissive or threatening. She approached Evelyn afterward with a bright smile. "Oh my God," Serena said, grasping Evelyn's hands as if they were old friends. "You're even prettier in person. Graham talks about you all the time." Evelyn's smile was polite. "Does he?" Serena's eyes flicked over Evelyn, hair, dress, posture, in a single smooth scan. "He says you keep him grounded. That's so rare in this world." Evelyn nodded. "I try." Serena laughed lightly. "You're adorable." That word was a needle, wrapped in sugar. Evelyn felt it and pretended she didn't. Over the next year, Serena became a constant background presence. Always at events, always helping with PR, always laughing too loudly at Graham's jokes, always touching his arm when she spoke as if she had a claim. Evelyn watched quietly. Graham didn't hide it at first because he didn't think he needed to. He believed Evelyn would never leave. He believed she had nowhere to go. Because he didn't know the truth. He didn't know the name Evelyn Kane. He didn't know Kane Consortium had eyes on every major financial artery in the country. He didn't know Evelyn had been trained to disappear, to survive, to strike. All he knew was that she used to pour coffee in Kansas. So when Graham began to drift away, he didn't fear consequences. He feared only inconvenience. And by the time he finally said the word divorce, he expected her to crumble like paper. He expected tears, begging, a desperate bargain. Because men like Graham didn't just want to win. They wanted the other person to admit defeat. The day Graham decided to end their marriage, the sky over Glass Ridge Estate was too bright. It was the kind of crisp Crestmont morning people posted on social media. Sunlight catching on glass walls, ocean air drifting up the cliff, the garden trimmed with obsessive care. Inside the house, Everything smelled like lemon polish and quiet. Evelyn was in the kitchen, slicing fruit. It was a small domestic act she performed not because it mattered, but because routine was armor. Graham entered without greeting. He didn't kiss her cheek. He didn't ask about her day. He didn't even look at the fruit. He tossed a thick folder onto the marble island. "Sign," he said. Evelyn's knife paused mid-slice. She looked at the folder, then at him. "What is this?" she asked softly, as if the volume might break something. Graham exhaled like she was being difficult by existing. "The prenup and the divorce petition." Evelyn set the knife down carefully. "Divorce," she repeated, tasting the word. Graham's eyes flickered. Impatience, guilt, then hardened certainty. "It's over," he said. "I'm not happy, and I'm not going to pretend anymore." Evelyn's hands folded in front of her. "Is this about Serena?" Graham's mouth tightened, the way it did when he was annoyed someone had guessed correctly. "She understands me," he said. "She's in my world. She fits." Evelyn's gaze lowered to the folder. She didn't open it yet. She looked at the edges, the thickness, the weight of paper pretending to be moral. "How long have you been planning this?" she asked. Graham shrugged. "Long enough." Evelyn lifted her eyes. "And you want me to sign today?" "Yes." He leaned forward. "I've been generous. You'll get $50,000. That's more than most people see in a year." Evelyn blinked slowly. "50,000, she repeated. Graham nodded like he was proud. "You'll be fine." Evelyn's voice stayed calm, but something in the air changed. Subtle, like pressure before a storm. "You want me to leave with $50,000, she said, "after 5 years. Graham's expression sharpened. "Don't make this dramatic." Evelyn almost smiled. Dramatic. As if drama was something she could choose not to breathe. "What about the house?" she asked. Graham laughed. "The house is mine." "The cars?" "Mine." "The accounts?" "Mine." He tapped the folder. "You signed the prenup when we got married. You waived claims. This is all legal." Evelyn stared at the folder, remembering that day, how the prenup had been presented as a formality, how Graham's attorney had smiled as if it was simple, how Evelyn had signed without reading because she already knew what it said. Because Kane Consortium's lawyers had written their own version, one that made sure Evelyn would never be trapped by paper. But Graham didn't know that. He thought his ink was a cage. He watched her for a moment, then added, casually cruel, "You should be grateful, Evelyn. I mean, I could have left you with nothing." Evelyn's fingers tightened slightly. Graham kept going because he couldn't help himself. "You were a waitress in Wichita," he said. "I gave you this life. You think you would have ever seen Crestmont without me? You think you'd be sipping champagne with CEOs if I hadn't found you?" His words were sharp, but his tone was almost affectionate, as if he genuinely believed he was stating facts. Evelyn's mind flashed to the diner, the burnt coffee, the rain, the coded message. Do it. She thought of her training, the years of being taught that humiliation was a tool, that pain was temporary, that mission came first. Still, something inside her, something human, ached. Not because she needed his money, because she had once allowed herself to believe he saw her. Evelyn reached for the folder and opened it. Pages of legal language slid into view. Graham watched her like a gambler watching dice. Evelyn flipped to the end where the signature lines waited. Graham's attorney had already initialed. Graham's signature was already there, bold, confident, arrogant. All that was missing was hers. Evelyn picked up the pen Graham placed beside the folder like a weapon. She held it between her fingers, feeling its weight. Graham leaned back, satisfied. "See? This doesn't have to be ugly." Evelyn looked up. "If I sign this, you'll let me go quietly?" Graham smiled. Of course. Evelyn nodded, then lowered her gaze and wrote, Evelyn Ashford. The ink dried instantly under Crestmont's controlled air. Graham's smile widened, triumphant. That's it, he said, snatching the folder. We're done. Evelyn's eyes stayed on the line she'd written. In a different life, that signature might have been surrender. In her life, it was a trigger. Graham slid a second paper across the counter. Pack your things. You have until tonight. Evelyn's chest rose and fell once. What if I don't? She asked. Graham's gaze turned cold. Then security will help you. Evelyn nodded slowly. She walked upstairs without another word, each step measured, controlled. In the bedroom, she opened the closet and stared at rows of designer clothing Graham had bought her like costumes. She didn't touch most of them. She took a single suitcase and filled it with plain things, jeans, sweaters, sneakers. A few books. A photograph Graham had never cared to look at closely. Evelyn standing beside a woman whose face had been cut out of frame by an old crease. In the bathroom, she paused at the mirror. She looked like Evelyn Ashford, soft, pale, carefully harmless. She leaned closer until her breath fogged the glass. And in the fog, for a moment, she saw another face, her own, stripped of performance. Her phone buzzed. Move. At the front door, Graham waited with Serena. Serena wore a smile that was both apology and victory. Oh, Serena said, fake gentle. Evelyn, I didn't expect you so soon. Evelyn lifted her suitcase and stepped past her. Graham stood in the doorway like a judge. You'll get the transfer by tomorrow, he said, as if dispensing charity. 50,000. Use it to start over. Evelyn paused on the threshold and turned back. Graham's eyes dared her to beg. Serena's eyes dared her to cry. Evelyn didn't do either. She said, You were right about one thing. Graham's brow lifted. Yeah? Evelyn's smile was faint, almost sad. I did come from nowhere. Then she stepped out into the sunlight, and the door shut behind her with a soft click that sounded, to Graham, like victory. To Evelyn, it sounded like the end of a chapter she had outlived. She walked down the driveway as if she had nowhere to go. The guards watched her with the mild contempt reserved for the discarded. At the gate, a driver waited in an unremarkable black sedan. No luxury logo, no attention. Evelyn slid into the back seat. The driver didn't ask where she was headed. He already knew. As the car pulled away, Evelyn looked back once at Glass Ridge Estate, not with longing, with calculation. Then she leaned her head against the seat and closed her eyes. Her phone buzzed again. Phase 2. He escalates. Evelyn's lips pressed together because she knew Graham. He wouldn't be satisfied with ending the marriage. He would need to destroy the story of it. He would need the world to believe he was the victim, and for that, he would come for her name. Graham Voss's favorite weapon wasn't money. It was narrative. Within 48 hours of the divorce filing, the first leak hit a tech gossip site. An anonymous source close to Voss claimed Evelyn had misrepresented herself from the beginning. 3 days later, a business blog ran a headline suggesting she had targeted Graham for his wealth. A week later, an interview with Serena appeared. Nothing direct, nothing actionable, just carefully planted phrases. It's sad when people aren't honest about who they are. I think Graham just wanted love. Sometimes you try to help someone and they take advantage. Evelyn read the articles in a small hotel room downtown. The room smelled like stale air freshener and old detergent. The bedspread had a pattern that felt designed to hide stains. She sat by the window, phone in hand, watching Crestmont traffic glide by like indifferent fish. The headlines didn't hurt because they were true. They hurt because Graham wanted them to. Humiliation was the point. And when humiliation alone didn't satisfy him, he moved to the next stage. The lawsuit arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a man in a stiff suit who looked embarrassed to be the messenger of someone else's cruelty. Evelyn took the papers and shut the door. She sat at the small table near the window and read every word. Fraud. Misrepresentation. Damages. Graham was accusing her of lying about her identity to gain access to his assets, his company, his reputation. He was asking for financial restitution. He was asking for public vindication. He wanted the court to declare that Evelyn Ashford was a con artist. He wanted the world to watch her fall. Evelyn set the papers down. Her hands were steady. Outside, a siren wailed and faded. Her phone buzzed. He filed. "You're clear to disclose." Evelyn didn't respond. Instead, she stood and walked to the bathroom. She stared at herself in the mirror, at the plain sweater, the tired eyes, the softness that had become habit. She turned on the sink and let water run over her fingers. Then she lifted her wrist and stared at the pale line where an old band had once been. A reminder. A promise. She dried her hands and returned to the table. This time, she didn't read the lawsuit like a victim. She read it like a map. Graham had put his arrogance into writing. He had claimed she had access to assets she never touched. He had claimed she had hidden accounts she never opened. He had claimed she had no family, no backing, no resources, because he believed the identity he knew was the only one that existed. He believed Evelyn Ashford was all she was, and he was about to learn the cost of ignorance. Evelyn picked up her phone and typed a single word. Proceed. Within an hour, the hotel room door opened, not with a knock, but with the kind of smooth entry that suggested the people on the other side didn't fear consequences. 3 individuals stepped in. 2 wore suits. 1 wore a plain jacket with a badge clipped inside. They didn't look like security for a celebrity. They looked like people who protected infrastructure. The woman in front held out a small envelope. "Miss Kane," she said. Evelyn took the envelope. Inside was a new phone, sealed. The woman continued, "We have confirmation the network is watching. They believe the cipher is exposed now that the marriage is ending." Evelyn's gaze sharpened. "So Graham's move accelerated it." "Yes," the woman said. "And he's made it worse by dragging you into public court. He's stirring the water." Evelyn nodded once. "Then we finish it." The agent, because that's what she was, glanced toward the window. "Federal protection will be visible at the hearing." Evelyn's lips curved slightly. "Good." The agent hesitated. "Your husband doesn't understand what he's invited." "He will," Evelyn said. After they left, Evelyn sat alone again. The motel room felt smaller. She opened her suitcase and pulled out the photo, the one with the missing face. She smoothed it carefully, then flipped it over. On the back, in faded ink, there was a single word: Kane. Evelyn stared at it until her vision tightened. Then she folded the photo and placed it in her pocket like a talisman. That night, across town, Graham celebrated. He hosted a private gathering at a rooftop lounge, surrounded by men who called him visionary, and women who laughed at his jokes like their futures depended on it. Serena stood beside him, hand resting on his arm like a claim. Graham lifted a glass of champagne. "To freedom," he said. Everyone cheered. Serena leaned in close. "You did the right thing," she whispered. "You can't let her ruin you?" Graham smirked. "She won't." Serena's nails pressed lightly into his sleeve. "Good, because if she tries to play victim..." Graham's eyes glinted. "I'll bury her." He believed it, and if belief were enough, he might have succeeded. But in another part of Crestmont, far from rooftop lights and curated laughter, Evelyn stepped through a steel door into a quiet warehouse that smelled like cold metal and antiseptic. Inside, the lighting was dim, controlled. A long table waited, surrounded by people who didn't smile. At the head of the table sat a man in his 60s. silver hair neatly combed, eyes calm and sharp. He didn't stand when Evelyn entered. He didn't need to. His authority filled the room like gravity. Evelyn walked toward him, her steps confident now, her posture different, not the gentle curve of a diner waitress, but the straight line of someone who had been raised to command. She stopped at the end of the table. The man spoke, voice low. Evelyn. Not Ashford. Not the name Graham knew. Just Evelyn. The real Evelyn. She met his gaze. Chairman, she said. The room seemed to exhale, because now there was no cover left to maintain. The man nodded once. Your mission is complete, he said. Evelyn's expression didn't change. Not yet. He folded his hands. Graham filed. Publicly. Evelyn nodded. I expected it. A woman at the table slid a folder toward Evelyn. We've traced the criminal network's interest. They're using the court hearing as a distraction. They believe the divorce will force you to reveal your background. Evelyn opened the folder. Inside were photographs, names, financial flows, a web of quiet money and loud violence. She closed it. Then we reveal, she said. The chairman's eyes softened just slightly. And you understand what that means. Evelyn's voice was steady. It means my life as Evelyn Ashford ends. And everything attached to it, the chairman added. Evelyn thought of Graham at the beginning, his tired hands, his quiet confessions in the diner. She thought of the nights he'd come home shaken and let her hold his head like she could heal him. She let herself feel the smallest pang. Then she locked it away. Yes, she said. The chairman nodded, satisfied. He turned to another man in the room. Call Marcus Vale. A pause, then, tell him it's time to butcher. Marcus Vale arrived without fanfare. No entourage. No dramatic entrance. Just a black car pulling up to the warehouse, a door opening, and a man stepping out like he was walking into an operating room. Evelyn watched him approach through the glass. He didn't look like a lawyer people imagined. No slick charm, no theatrical smile. His face was calm, almost bored, but his eyes carried the quiet certainty of someone who had watched powerful people collapse and never once felt sorry. He entered the room and stopped at the table. Miss Kane, he said, voice flat. Evelyn nodded. Marcus? He placed a leather folder on the table and opened it. Inside were documents that looked like ordinary paperwork to anyone else. To Evelyn, they looked like weapons. Voss Nova Systems is leveraged, Marcus said. He hides it behind valuation talk, but the debt structure is fragile. Evelyn's gaze sharpened. How fragile? Marcus slid one page forward. His primary notes are held by 3 entities. 2 are willing to sell. 1 is protected by pride and a minor god complex. Evelyn almost smiled. That sounds familiar. Marcus's expression didn't change. Kane Consortium's investment arm can acquire all 3 within 48 hours. Quietly. Evelyn leaned forward. Do it. Marcus paused. Once we hold the notes, we can trigger repayment if he breaches conditions. Public litigation creates risk. Misrepresentation accusations create risk. He's already lit the match. Evelyn's fingers tapped the table once. The warehouse was silent except for the soft hum of climate control. Good, she said. Then let him burn. Marcus closed the folder. There's more. Evelyn lifted her chin. Marcus continued. Federal investigators believe the criminal network is using his infrastructure to probe the cipher. If we move now, we can flush them out. Evelyn nodded slowly. So the hearing becomes bait. Yes. Evelyn sat back. For 5 years, she had been a shadow inside a glass house. For 5 years, she had watched a man she married, on orders, grow addicted to his own story. Now the story would end. Not with revenge in the sloppy sense, with consequence. Evelyn stood. The chairman watched her. Are you ready? Evelyn didn't hesitate. She said, "They think I'm a poor woman with no backbone." Marcus Vale picked up the folder, eyes steady. "Let them." Evelyn added, "They wanted a spectacle." Her gaze hardened. "Then we give them one." The night before the hearing, Graham slept in the master bedroom at Glass Ridge Estate for the first time in weeks. Not because he missed it, because he wanted to wake up in victory. Serena lay beside him, tracing lazy circles on his chest. "You're going to destroy her tomorrow," she murmured. Graham stared at the ceiling. "She destroyed herself." Serena laughed softly. "I still can't believe she tried to pull that quiet little wife thing. It's always the quiet ones." Graham smirked. "She thought she could walk away with my name intact." Serena sat up slightly, her expression sharpening. "You did the right thing by suing. If she lied about her identity, the court will crush her." Graham turned his head. "She didn't lie about anything important." Serena's eyes narrowed. "Then why did you file?" Graham hesitated. Because the truth was, he didn't file for justice. He filed because he couldn't stand the idea of Evelyn leaving without being humiliated. He filed because he needed to be the hero. He filed because he needed the world to clap when he walked away. He didn't say that. Instead, he said, "Because I'm not letting anyone make a fool of me." Serena smiled. "Good." She leaned down and kissed him. "After tomorrow, we can start fresh. No secrets. No baggage." Graham closed his eyes, letting himself believe it. Outside, far beyond the cliff where Glass Ridge stood, a different kind of vehicle crossed the night sky. Silent until it wasn't. A helicopter, lights dimmed, moving toward Crestmont like a decision. Morning at Crestmont Federal Courthouse felt like a storm made of people. Reporters packed the steps, cameras aimed like rifles, bloggers shouted into phones. A few investors lurked at the edges, pretending not to be there, but watching the way men watched the stock ticker when their fortune depended on it. Inside, the courtroom smelled like old wood and newer fear. Graham sat at the plaintiff's table, his attorney arranging papers with performative competence. Serena sat behind him, legs crossed, posture perfect. She wore a pale dress and a sympathetic expression meant for the cameras that weren't allowed inside. She wanted to look like the woman standing beside a wronged man. Graham leaned toward his attorney. "Where is she?" His attorney glanced at the clock. "If she doesn't show, we win by default." Graham smiled. "She'll show." Because part of him, despite everything, wanted to see her face when she lost. He wanted the confirmation. He wanted the collapse. The courtroom doors opened. A hush moved through the room like a hand across water. Evelyn entered. Not hurried, not hesitant, just walking. Behind her, a small group followed, security with earpieces, 2 individuals in suits, and Marcus Vale carrying his leather folder like a verdict. Graham's breath caught. For a moment, he didn't recognize her, not because she looked different, but because she moved different. The Evelyn he had dismissed had always moved like she was careful not to take up space. This woman moved like space belonged to her. She sat at the defense table and placed her hands calmly on the wood. Graham's attorney stood quickly, confidence rattled. "Your Honor, we object to—" The judge entered. Everyone stood. Judge Alden Reyes was older, face lined with years of hearing lies and learning to recognize the ones that mattered. He sat, eyes scanning the room with practiced neutrality. "Be seated," he said. The courtroom sank into silence again. The judge looked at the case file, then at Graham. "Mr. Voss, you are alleging fraud and misrepresentation." Graham stood. "Yes, Your Honor. Yes, My wife, my ex-wife, lied about her identity and used me." Evelyn's attorney rose. Marcus Vale's voice was calm, precise. "Your Honor, we are prepared to respond. But before we do, I would like to clarify something for the record." Judge Reyes lifted a brow. "Proceed." Marcus turned slightly, facing the court. The defendant is known in this complaint as Evelyn Ashford. That name was used for personal privacy and operational security. The judge's eyes narrowed. Operational security? A ripple moved through the courtroom. Graham frowned. What is he talking about? Marcus continued. The defendant's legal name is Evelyn Kane. Silence. It was the kind of silence that made even breathing feel loud. Graham blinked once, then laughed. A short, disbelieving sound. That's... he began. But Judge Reyes's gaze sharpened and his voice dropped. Did you say Kane? Marcus nodded. Yes, Your Honor. The judge's expression didn't change much, but something in his eyes shifted. Recognition. Graham's attorney stiffened. Serena's smile froze. Graham whispered, No. Evelyn didn't look at him. She looked only at the judge. Judge Reyes cleared his throat. Mr. Vale, are you implying the Kane Consortium is involved? Marcus's tone stayed even. I'm stating it. Graham stood abruptly. Your Honor, this is theatrics. She's trying to intimidate. Judge Reyes cut him off with a glance. Mr. Voss, sit down. Graham's mouth snapped shut. He sat rigid, fury simmering. The judge turned to Marcus. Continue. Marcus opened his folder and removed a document. Your Honor, Marcus said, we have evidence that Mr. Voss's lawsuit and public allegations have created a material risk event for Voss Nova Systems' debt obligations. Graham's attorney stood. Objection. This is unrelated. Marcus didn't even look at him. It is directly related, counsel. You made it related when you dragged her identity into public court. Judge Reyes held up a hand. Overruled. Proceed. Marcus laid out the structure with surgical clarity. The debt, the covenants, the conditions that required stability and truthful reporting. He spoke like a man reading a recipe, not a man wielding a guillotine. Graham's attorney tried to interrupt. Marcus continued. Over the past 48 hours, Marcus said, Kane Consortium's investment arm acquired controlling interest in the notes held against Voss Nova Systems. Graham's eyes widened. That's impossible. You can't. Marcus finally looked at him. And in that look was something terrifying. Not hatred, not anger. Just inevitability. We can, Marcus said. We did. The courtroom felt suddenly too small. Serena's fingers tightened around her purse. Graham's phone buzzed. A sharp, bright sound in the quiet. Ting. Graham glanced down despite himself. A bank notification. He frowned and swiped. Another buzz. Ting. Another notification. His brow furrowed deeper. His attorney whispered, What is it? Graham ignored him, eyes locked on the screen. Account access restricted. He blinked. He tried again. Account temporarily unavailable. His heart rate spiked, not with fear yet, but with disbelief. He looked up at Marcus. What did you do? Marcus held up another document. We initiated a repayment demand under the covenants triggered by reputational risk and litigation instability. Mr. Voss Nova Systems is in breach. Graham stood so fast his chair scraped the floor. This is extortion! Judge Reyes's voice was sharp. Mr. Voss, sit. Down. Graham's breath came hard. He sat, but his hands trembled now, like they had that first night in the diner, only now the trembling wasn't exhaustion. It was the first touch of panic. Marcus continued. We are not here to discuss Mr. Voss's business decisions, but his complaint argues the defendant targeted him for his assets. The reality is the opposite. Marcus turned slightly toward Evelyn. She waived claims in the divorce agreement. She accepted $50,000 and left quietly. Mr. Voss then escalated, publicly, seeking humiliation and destruction. Marcus's gaze returned to the judge. We are prepared to counterclaim for defamation and malicious prosecution. But today, our primary request is dismissal, because the premise of fraud collapses under basic facts. Judge Reyes's eyes moved to Graham. Mr. Voss, did you disclose your debt risk in this complaint? Graham's attorney swallowed. Your Honor, that's not required. Judge Reyes's gaze turned cold. It becomes required when your allegations create financial consequences that affect the credibility of your claims. Graham's phone buzzed again. Ting. He looked down. A new notification. Vehicle repossession order initiated. Graham's mouth went dry. Outside, faintly through the courtroom's thick walls, he could hear commotion. Voices. Movement. As if something was happening in the parking lot. Graham's attorney leaned in and whispered, pale. Your car. Graham's eyes snapped up. What about my car? His attorney didn't answer, because he didn't have to. Graham could see it in the man's face. Something had just been taken in real time. Graham turned toward Evelyn for the first time. Evelyn, he hissed, using the name like a plea now, not a command. What is this? Evelyn's gaze met his at last, and in her eyes there was no cruelty, just clarity. She said softly, You wanted the world to watch me lose everything. Graham's jaw clenched. Evelyn continued, voice steady. So I'm letting the world watch what you built on debt and arrogance collapse. Serena stood abruptly, her chair scraping. She looked at Graham as if she was seeing him for the first time. Not as a billionaire, not as a prize, but as a man with gravity losing hold of him. Her eyes darted to the papers on Marcus's table, to the judge's expression, to Graham's phone buzzing like a heartbeat gone wrong. She swallowed. Then she picked up her purse. Graham turned toward her, desperate. Serena. Serena didn't touch him. She leaned in, voice low, almost irritated. You told me you were untouchable. Graham's eyes widened. I am. This is just a tactic. Serena stepped back. I don't do sinking ships. And just like that, she walked out of the courtroom, heels clicking, head high, abandoning him with the same casual efficiency she'd used to attach herself. Graham stared after her, stunned. The judge's gavel sounded, a small, sharp crack that felt like the snap of a bone. Order, Judge Reyes said. He looked at Graham with the kind of disgust judges rarely allowed themselves to show. Mr. Voss, he said, your complaint appears motivated less by justice and more by vengeance. Graham's attorney began, Your Honor. Judge Reyes held up a hand. I've heard enough. He turned to Evelyn. Ms. Kane, did you misrepresent your identity for personal gain? Evelyn's voice was calm. No, Your Honor. Judge Reyes narrowed his eyes. Then why use a different name? Marcus stepped in smoothly. Your Honor, we can submit sealed documentation. There is an ongoing investigation involving attempted intrusion into protected encryption infrastructure. Ms. Kane's cover was part of security protocol. The judge stared for a long moment. Then he nodded once. The implication hung in the air. Evelyn wasn't hiding because she was guilty. She was hiding because she was important. Judge Reyes looked back at Graham. This court does not exist to serve your ego, he said. Graham's face flushed. Your Honor, she... Judge Reyes raised the gavel. Dismissed, he said. The word hit the room like thunder. Graham blinked as if he hadn't understood. Dismissed, he repeated. Judge Reyes continued. If the defense chooses to file counterclaims, they are free to do so. This session is adjourned. The gavel struck again, and the sound that followed wasn't applause. It was the sound of a man's world collapsing in silence. Graham stood, swaying slightly. His attorney grabbed his arm. We need to leave. Graham's eyes were wild. My accounts, my company, my... Marcus Vale gathered his papers calmly, as if packing up after a routine meeting. Evelyn remained seated for a moment, watching Graham not with satisfaction, but with something closer to grief, because this was the moment she had known would come. Not because she wanted it, because he had chosen it. Graham turned toward her one last time, voice raw. Was any of it real? Evelyn's throat tightened, just for a second. Then she answered honestly, the only mercy she offered. I wanted it to be. Graham's lips parted. He looked like a man trying to find a door in a wall. Evelyn stood. She walked past him without touching him, without spitting poison, without theatrical victory. As she passed, she leaned in slightly and spoke so quietly only he heard. The worst part, she said, is you never even bothered to look closely enough to notice who you were insulting. Graham flinched. Evelyn kept walking. Outside, the courthouse steps were a roar of cameras and questions, but Evelyn's security detail moved like a tide, clearing space. Evelyn descended the steps. Graham followed behind, pushed by his attorney, face twisted with disbelief. Reporters shouted, Mr. Voss, did you just lose your company? Someone yelled, Is Kane Consortium taking control? Another voice, Miss Kane, was this revenge? Evelyn didn't answer. She walked toward a waiting vehicle, black, unmarked. As she reached the door, her phone buzzed once. Ting, a message from an unknown number. Targets moving. Bait worked. Evelyn didn't smile. She simply got into the car. Because the court was only one battlefield. And the real reason she'd worn the mask for 5 years was about to be finished. Graham Voss spent his first night as a former billionaire in a hotel he had once used for discreet meetings. Not the penthouse, not the executive suite. A standard room, paid for by a credit card that still worked, for now. He stood in the bathroom, staring at the mirror like it was a stranger. His tie hung loose. His hair had lost its control. His eyes looked too wide. He held his phone in his hand like a lifeline. No new notifications, no buzzing, no ting, just quiet. And in that quiet, he could hear himself thinking. He tried calling Serena. It rang, then went to voicemail. He tried again. Voicemail. He texted, Where are you? No reply. He threw the phone onto the bed, then picked it up again, unable to let it go. He opened his banking app. The screen loaded, then stopped. Access denied. His breath came shallow. He paced. He called his CFO. No answer. He called his board chair. A tired voice finally picked up. Graham. Graham's words tumbled out. We can fix this. We can refinance. We can... The board chair sighed. You don't understand. They own the debt. They own the leverage. They own your timeline. Graham's voice cracked. She bought my company? The board chair was quiet for a beat. Then, she didn't buy your company. Graham swallowed. The board chair continued. She bought your mistake. The call ended. Graham stood frozen. Then he laughed. A harsh sound, half choking. A waitress. A Kansas nobody. That was how he'd described her. And now she had reached into his life and turned off the lights with paperwork. The next day, news spread fast. Investors panicked. Headlines multiplied. Commentators dissected every second of the courthouse footage, every micro-expression, every whispered moment. Graham's name trended like a cautionary tale. Serena posted a cryptic story about protecting your peace and vanished from public view. And Evelyn returned to a building the public didn't know existed. Kane Consortium's headquarters wasn't flashy. No giant logo. No glass tower screaming for attention. Just a sleek structure tucked behind security gates, designed less for admiration and more for endurance. Inside, the air smelled faintly like clean metal and expensive coffee. Not burnt, not punished. A controlled aroma. Evelyn walked through the lobby, past employees who nodded respectfully but didn't stare, because here she wasn't a novelty. She was part of the architecture. In an executive conference room, the chairman waited. Marcus Vail stood near the window. A federal agent sat at the far end, reviewing a file. Evelyn took her seat. The chairman spoke first. The network took the bait, and the agent nodded. We have movement. We have names. We have enough to make arrests within 48 hours. Evelyn's shoulders loosened slightly. Not relief, not joy, but the quiet satisfaction of a mission nearing completion. Marcus slid a document toward her. This is the final authorization. Evelyn looked at the paper. One signature, one line, another ending. She picked up the pen, and for a moment, her mind returned to the marble kitchen at Glass Ridge Estate, the sunlight, the lemon polish, Graham's cold voice telling her to sign. She remembered the feeling of ink drying under controlled air. She remembered how he had smiled, thinking he had trapped her. Evelyn set the pen down for a second, staring at it like it was a memory made physical. Marcus watched her carefully. Do you want to pause? Evelyn shook her head. No, she said softly. I want to finish. She signed. Evelyn Kane. The pen stroke was smooth, confident, final. The chairman nodded, satisfied. The agent closed the file. We'll keep you informed. As they stood to leave, Marcus lingered. He looked at Evelyn with the first hint of curiosity he'd shown since arriving. You could have taken more from him, he said. Legally, easily. You waived it. Evelyn's gaze drifted to the window where Crestmont's skyline shimmered in the distance like a mirage. I didn't want his money, she said. Marcus's brow lifted slightly. Evelyn continued. I wanted him to understand something. Marcus waited. Evelyn's voice was quiet. That people aren't valuable because someone like him decides they are. Marcus nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Message received, he said. He left the room. Evelyn remained seated alone. For the first time in days, there was no urgent message, no code, no phase to activate. Just silence. She stood and walked to a small kitchenette in the corner of the executive floor. A machine hummed softly. She brewed coffee. As the aroma rose, she hesitated. It was rich, clean, expensive. Nothing like the diner. On impulse, she reached into a cabinet and pulled out a small jar labeled in neat handwriting, Dark Roast, Wichita. She hadn't opened it in years. She scooped a small amount into the brew, contaminating the perfect blend with something harsher. The scent shifted. Bitter. Burnt. Memory. Evelyn poured a cup and carried it back to the window. She took a sip. It tasted awful, and it felt like honesty. She watched the city below. Cars moving, people rushing, lives unaware of the invisible wars fought above their heads in code and courtrooms. Somewhere out there, Graham was waking up in a world that didn't bend for him anymore. And for a moment, Evelyn let herself feel the ache. Not for him. For what could have been, if he had chosen love over ego. Then she let it go, because grief was not her job anymore. Her phone buzzed. One vibration. Ting. Evelyn's eyes lowered. A message from the agent. Arrests confirmed. Network disrupted. Aegis secured. Evelyn exhaled slowly. She took another sip of the bitter coffee and closed her eyes. Outside, far away, a helicopter passed over Crestmont, distant blades, faint thunder. This time it didn't feel like a threat. It felt like punctuation. Evelyn opened her eyes and whispered, not to the city, not to Graham, but to herself. You don't get to decide my worth. Then she turned away from the window and walked back into the building that had always been hers. Not as a woman returning to privilege, as a woman returning to truth. And if there's anything this story leaves behind, it's this. Sometimes the person you dismiss as ordinary is only wearing ordinary like armor. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is quiet because they're listening. And sometimes, the moment you think you've won is the moment the real game begins. If this story stayed with you, if you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, reduced to a version of yourself someone else found convenient, leave a small note in the comments. Not for the algorithm. For the people who need to know they're not alone.